I do think that Timothée Chalamet would probably be an amazing Hans Goss story.
Yes, and I'm sure the studios would love for you to say, just shoot him a DM, lock it in.
Yeah,
movie's good to go. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to One Nightstand. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
To kick things off, have you always been a big reader?
I feel like I am a bit of a late bloomer in terms of reading. I don't, my parents weren't big readers, and I would say I didn't really develop my own taste in books until I was in college, and then I became a bigger reader.
What was there a particular class, book, author that kind of kicked that journey off for you?
Yeah, definitely. I had an amazing creative writing professor named Daniel Torde, who's also a novelist, and he definitely exposed me to my taste in books in a big way. I would say at least half of these books are things that I read in his class.
Oh, really?
So he introduced me to Lorrie Moore and Philip Roth and John Updike and Richard Ford and Marilynne Robinson and all of these great authors that I still really love today. So that had a big impact on me.
We'll start by talking about Anagrams by Lorrie Moore, but I discovered her pretty early on in college too. A friend recommended Self-Help, her short story collection, and like How to Be the Other Woman just like completely blew my mind and how clever it was. Anagrams was not one of hers I was familiar with. So what made you choose that today?
Anagrams was the first Lorrie Moore book I read. And I had the same reaction, was just, how can someone be so clever and so funny? It's a book that has stuck with me for a really long time, and I remember being a favorite of hers.
I read this quote that kind of bummed me out about her, but like I also understand that she's like one of the greatest writers we have without their one great book. And I'm curious what you think of that.
I mean, for me, Anagrams
was
that book. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think she's someone too that works so exceptionally well in the short fiction form. And when I was in college and taking a lot of creative writing courses because of the nature of a semester, I wrote a lot of short fiction. And, I think she's stylistically someone I can't even aspire toward because it feels so beyond me and so worthless to even attempt to write in that fashion. But if I could choose a writer that I would like to emulate, if I could be a writer, it would be Lorrie Moore, because I just think that she is sort of like an unparalleled, intelligent, brilliant, funny writer that I think every person would probably love to write like.
Were you an English major in school?
I was a creative writing major.
Okay, so what were you writing about at the time?
I was interested in like weird, manly, working class fiction. So I really enjoyed authors like Richard Ford and Raymond Carver and John Updike and Tobias Wolff, and wanted to write like these like tough men. So I was writing a lot of short fiction like that.
I was very fascinated that you've talked about wanting to read kind of like an incel canon for yourself.
Yeah. Well, it would probably be Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I think I was just reading a lot of like things that are quote unquote a part of the incel canon, like Bret Easton Ellis and David Foster Wallace, even though these men aren't necessarily trying to promote those ideals. But they are sort of beloved works in that world for one reason. And I think Infinite Jest is sort of famously a book that no one ever finishes. And so to be annoying, I really felt like I must finish it and find out what it was about, and loved it so much. And I actually read Infinite Jest and Magic Mountain in the same year and found that experience of staying with characters for a really long time was really moving for me. When I finished Infinite Jest, I found myself really missing Dawn Gately and all of these characters that I had spent so much time with, and I hadn't really had that feeling before. And I felt the same way about the Magic Mountain. So maybe that's where that came from.
What was the span of time it took you to read Infinite Jest, and where were you in the world, life?
It was in 2023 in January, which is typically like slow time for musicians. And I was largely upstate and just, really dedicated to reading. And I was starting to work on the new album at that time. And so I wanted to read a lot. And it took me about six weeks and very like regimented reading.
Did you have like a page count that you were hoping for each day?
I think I tried to read around 50 pages a day.
Yeah.
But it's so tough because it's not only a large book, but so much of it is made up of footnotes, which are this like impossibly tiny font. So it's even more, it feels like even more pages than that. And it's also not easy reading. There's a lot of vocabulary that I was unfamiliar with, a lot of concepts that are kind of difficult. And parts of the book, I think, really fly by and are so engaging, and it feels kind of like a movie, and then parts of it are a little bit more complicated and take a long time to read. So some days 50 pages would be very easy to get through, and some days there's like a game called I forget what it's called, like Exiton or something. That whole description of that game, I think, probably took me longer to get through. But I loved it so much. I think it would. I have a fantasy that I am the one to adapt Infinite Jest into a film.
Well, that was a question I had for you, because obviously you spent a while working on the adaptation of your memoir, and that has its own complications being so close to a story. Yeah. And I was curious if there was one on the list that you'd want to adapt. But can you tell me a little bit about like what your Infinite Jest adaptation looks like in your mind?
It's been a while, but it seems like so clear to me. You would have to really prioritize certain sections. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that a tennis academy is just such a fun place to set a film, and the characters are so, I don't know, they're so memorable and so well written and so detailed and singular. And I just think that it would make for a really engaging film. So it's between that. I mean, I remember having that experience with both the Magic Mountain and Infinite Jest. I feel like I wish I could be the one to
I want you to
adapt these books. I think there is a Magic Mountain adaptation, but I haven't seen it.
For either one, is there a dream? Like, is there an actor you envision?
Oh, actually, I posted about this on Twitter, and I thought, what's his name? I personally think, who's the guy who's like the big beefy man in Blade Runner, in the new Blade Runner?
Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista. I think Dave Bautista would make an amazing Don Gately, because he's this big, meaty shouldered man that looks so gentle.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that he would make an amazing Don Gately. I don't know. I feel like Timo Sheshe would be a great Hans Castorp, probably. I'm sure he would love that. The only person I really pictured, which she's probably, this is a very niche reference, but in Sally Potter's Orlando, the woman who plays the Russian is always the woman that I imagine to play Madame Chauchat in The Magic Mountain.
So you have given this, I love the thought you've given this.
Yeah. I mean, you spend a lot of time with these books and you have your images of these people, but those two in particular would be my top choices. I do think that Timothée Chalamet would probably be an amazing Hans Castorp. Yes, and I'm sure the studios would love for you to say, just shoot him a DM, lock it in. Yeah, movie's good to go. So you started reading these books around the time that you're working on your most recent album. I also in interviews have read you talk about you were reading a lot of Bronte around the same time and all these different things. I think, there's such a fetishization of like sad girl literature and all these sort of, I'm trying to think of what the right word is, but like not the genre, but this overall feeling. And I think it's so interesting to think about you reading like both, Housekeeping and Marilynne Robinson really does kind of fit into this world of like isolation and depression for women, which I gravitate towards reading too, but then also just the complete opposite. I guess that's not a question, but I think I'm just really
fascinated by all the references you were drawing in these past few years.
I think that's a big part of making a record for me. Interestingly enough, I don't tend to listen to a lot of music when I'm working on a record, which is the total opposite of when I'm working on a book or a piece of writing. And then I have to read very voraciously, and also specifically things that I'm writing about.
Okay.
But yeah, I find if I listen to music, I don't want to accidentally ape anything. And so I do a lot of reading, or I watch a lot of films, or try to curate interacting with art that I think is sort of centered around themes that I am going for on a record. And so I wanted originally to make a creepy album. So I think that I gravitated towards reading a lot of things that had this sort of eerie feeling to them. So I was reading Wuthering Heights and Frankenstein and Jane Eyre, and then somehow like European romantic literature like Magic Mountain and, books like Infinite Jest also somehow sort of made their way into that reading list.
I love Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
I think that would be on my, if I were to be put on this series, that would definitely be in my top 4. But I think Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson in that eerie tradition really fits in. I mean, I read it for the first time in college, but ahead of today, I was reading it, and to me, this time around, I was like, this really feels like a ghost story. Yeah, for sure. I think that it's truly one of the most haunting novels I've ever read. I think it's my favorite novel of all time. I think Marilynne Robinson is just an exceptional, just uses language exceptionally in this way that, again, I don't even want to kid myself of ever getting anywhere near. But yeah, this book is so like evocative and has stuck with me for so long, and I find can map onto many different relationships in my life, and I think everyone has sort of had that experience where some kind of tragedy, like shared tragedy, can often create two pathways for people. And it's interesting to see that sort of unfold, and the sort of underlying mania and danger that exists throughout this book. And yeah, if you look at my copy of this book, it is probably half of it is underlined. Yeah, I think this is not my initial college copy, but I just, before we dig into all the very profound and beautiful things you said, it just struck me this time around, the confidence to have the first sentence be "My name is Ruth," because the whole, she's just such a beautiful writer, and that is just the simplicity of that. I'm just like, I don't know. I just think I love the boldness.
Yeah.
I mean, we use the word trauma bonding is so overused in our very therapy speak moment, but to read it now at this age and be thinking about Ruth and Lucille and the ways in which, like, of course, their paths have to eventually, either you're together forever, or you verge. I had a lot more empathy and understanding for Lucille's choice to strike out on her own this time around. Yeah.
They're crazy.
They're crazy. That's the other thing. They're crazy. Eating in the kitchen with like the lights off because you don't want to see the mess. It's just
such a. I think that this. I also hear there's a movie adaptation of this, and I haven't seen it, but
is there?
There is. Yeah.
From back in like the 80s or more
I think
recent?
so. Yeah,
Okay.
Roy actually just sent it to me, but I haven't watched it. But to me, this would also make it a very haunting film.
When I read this book for the first time, it was pretty soon after my first massive experience of loss, of having lost a childhood best friend. You're watching these two girls diverge through their grief, and one is really holding on to what's familiar, and the other is learning to coexist and move on and to grow. And I think it's just two very emblematic paths of how to live and move forward, to grow up in a world having experienced real grief. And I just was wondering if any of that resonated with you, or how you think about that.
To be honest, I'm not sure if I've done a reread of this book since my mother passed away.
Yeah.
But I do find that to be a very universal experience, that typically when someone dies, there is one person who kind of becomes this very responsible, very put together person that takes care of everything, and one person that sort of falls apart. I think that's a very common experience. And I don't know. I remember reading this book and thinking more about this idea of generational curses.
Oh, interesting.
And this kind of mania existing in Sylvie that's sort of been passed down by both her mother and her aunt, and Lucille sort of transcending that generational curse, and Sylvie sort of making peace with being this, like, leading this transient lifestyle. So yeah, I don't know if when I read this book, maybe because I didn't have like great grief in my life at that time, that was the main theme or the main response that I felt was the thread throughout the book. I sort of saw it, I think maybe because I was also a little bit crazy at the time. I was more drawn to that sort of thread of like, oh, am I going to allow this mental disturbance into my life, or am I going to continually push it out?
I think that's I love that reading. I mean, I think everything I read in college was pretty marred by grief. So I think that it's like even revisiting is hard for me to not see it through that lens. But a generational curse is like, I mean, talk about eerie and haunting. Like, I think that's there's a lot of that's a more poetic read of it.
Yeah. Both are poetic.
We're both so poetic, but no, I like that. And like,
now
I don't know, I'm just like thinking about the curses we inherit.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like the whole town too is kind of cursed by this like accident that exists under the lake, right? One of the notes that really stuck with me from my editor at the time at Knopf, Robin Desser, was that she wished that in Crying in H Mart I talked more about the weather. And I found that to be such a strange note and was very confused by it initially. And two of the books I reread were, so then I didn't read it front to back, but I think I only scanned Housekeeping for passages about the weather and underlined passages about the weather to just see how someone I really admired did it. And also did so with Richard Ford, who I feel like is in very stark contrast to her style of writing, very sparse. And I found that to be so helpful for my writing and really understand like what that does to both plant you in time and place. And also to just give breathing room to moments to remind you sort of essentially where you're at in the story. So yeah, that wasn't one of the best pieces of writing advice, and I quickly turned to Marilynne Robinson to see how a master.
It's funny because we actually it was a quick phoner when Crying in H Mart came out, but we got to speak around that time.
Yeah,
and I was writing my first book at that point.
Oh, really?
And you had said, and you sort of taught, and the only reason I remember it is because it really was impactful for me as well.
Yeah.
And you talked about how your editor said, I really want to feel the Pacific Northwest.
Yes,
and I think she talked. I really like. I didn't brush up on this, but it truly stayed with me. And it was something a note that I took was that she talked about, she edited Cheryl Strayed, right? The Wild. And she was like, and I guess maybe what was the note she gave Cheryl Strayed is like,
we want to see the trail.
We want to see
the trail, yeah.
And like, that was something whenever I was feeling stuck, just was like, well, what does it look like outside right now? Yeah. And so it's funny that note that she gave you that really stuck with you actually really transcended onto me. Yeah, so it's nice to come full circle and talk about it again. You just want you want the reader to experience all the senses. Yeah, and I think also when you're writing, you forget, you take for granted what you already know that the reader doesn't know. So, at the time, and also it made me just realize so much about, that note made me realize so much about my life too, and how much that environment really impacted my character, I think. I never really thought, for me, Eugene, Oregon was such a mundane town. But then, in describing where I grew up, which was also just a little bit outside of town, kind of in the forest and sort of isolated from, like, I couldn't walk to any, I couldn't walk anywhere. Okay. We were kind of sort of out in the sticks. And I didn't realize how much that landscape really impacted not only my personality, but my relationship with my mother and the story in such a big way, because it sort of felt almost like we were in a sanatorium in that house. And yeah, it made me realize like how both pastoral but claustrophobic that landscape was for my childhood, and also my relationship with my mom, and like during that time of caretaking.
yeah, I feel like that's a big part of Housekeeping as well, or probably any of these great books.
Yeah.
Is just like how crucial understanding where you are is to a story.
Well, let's talk about Magic Mountain, because that does really, that sanatorium isolated feeling is such a natural segue into it. I read you said it's your husband's favorite book, and you read it in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I really enjoy trying to pair, like a fine wine. I like to pair my books with my travels, and so I was going to Spain to Madrid for the first time and read Death in the Afternoon, and I started reading Magic Mountain in Switzerland, and then of course ended up getting really sick while I was in Switzerland.
You got tuberculosis.
Yeah. I had something else, but it was a strange fiction mirroring reality type experience, and yeah, I don't know. I just loved this book so much. I mean, it's so beautifully written, and the tone that the author takes with his protagonist is both so kind of cruel and condescending, but also so he's so endeared by this very impressionable, romantic, kind of OG fancy boy Hans Castorp, who only smokes Maria Mancini cigars and has a certain digestif at dinner, and takes his rest cure with a camel hair blanket. There's just all of these really wonderful details in this novel that stay with you. And so the last song on my new album is called Magic Mountain. And I originally just wanted to kind of Kate Bush it and summarize the novel, because it's so great the way that she does with Wuthering Heights. And then in the recording studio, the engineer Joseph Lord was like, Blonde Redhead. I realized Blonde Redhead did the exact same thing. So I listened to the song, it's off of a great record, and I love Blonde Redhead, but I had not read Magic Mountain at the time and didn't realize that they had done that, and I was like, what are the odds?
What are the
odds actually?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the details are very similar because there's it's just a summary of the book. So yeah, it ended up becoming a much more personal song. The book takes place in Switzerland at a sanatorium. Hans Castorp is visiting his cousin and ends up staying for 7 years. And it's a book about the passage of time and life meaning, and you're kind of unsure if he's actually convalescing and there's something really wrong with him, if he really does have a shadow in his lung, or if these doctors are quacks and kind of making his condition worse. And they refer to the world outside of the sanatorium as the flatlands. And I think because honestly, everything I was reading at the time, I was kind of mapping onto my life as a touring musician. I remember reading Death in the Afternoon, which is a book, Hemingway's book about bullfighting, and being like, we are the matadors, because there's a whole passage about everyone wants to watch you fail, and also that the matadors can only give what the bull or what the audience is giving back to them, which I think is a shared feeling that many musicians or performers have. And so similarly, I began to really map this book onto my life and sort of saw life at a sanatorium kind of like life on tour, because you are both a part of life and sort of outside of it. It's this very isolating world of its own. It has its own sort of kooky routine. And life outside of this place is sort of happening without you and sort of passing you by. And suddenly 7 years go by and you're a totally different person. And it's very difficult to reacclimate into life outside of this bubble. So yeah, I had an interesting experience. I'm sure that Thomas Mann was not really thinking about the life of a mid-level indie touring musician, but it was very hard for me not to sort of see my life, not to map my own experiences onto this, onto these pages.
I mean, I think that's the beauty of reading, is the experiences, like what it draws out of you and what you bring yourself. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to read it another way.
Yeah. That song became sort of about both the Magic Mountain and my life of, I don't know, how one decision that you make in your life kind of robs you from another one. And it became a very personal song.
Well, let's go back to Infinite Jest for a second.
Sure.
So you said a little bit about the incel canon, but like what did you learn from endeavoring on that, like taking on that experience?
It wasn't really intentional. It kind of, I think, I knew the sort of lore around Infinite Jest, and I just found it to be an interesting challenge and wanted to know more about it. And then followed it up quickly with Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero.
I love Less Than Zero.
Me too.
That was a really formative
It's great,
book for me.
And then was also watching like a lot of David Fincher movies, and I was just like, why am I really interested in this?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of this material is just very, I don't know, like centers a certain type of masculinity. I mean, not particularly those books, but I don't know. I guess they're just like very intelligent, maybe too much for their own good writers. It's very stylized. It feels like they all have like this real thrust to it. And I don't know I think I've always enjoyed writing like that. And I think that it's really interesting that it's been sort of looked to, exists in this canon that is really beloved by a group of people that are a little bit lost.
Well, Infinite Jest itself, I mean, has become such like a shorthand for a certain kind
type
of guy.
Of annoying man.
Yeah.
Which I think I was like interested in just like understanding and also like being a little bit.
Well, I was going to say, like, part of me saw you put that on the list and I was like, oh, you're trying to like incite some chaos on twitter.com today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I genuinely just think it's a great novel. And I kind of enjoy books that, like, are an eye roll. Or, like, I think I enjoy or gravitate towards things that are, like, an eye roll experience or, like, have some kind of strange, like, connotation behind it.
As someone who likes that, in the way that many women call a man having Infinite Jest not, like, a red flag, what's yours?
What is my red flag book? That's a great question. I don't know.
Mein Kampf. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, great response. That would be a definite red flag for me. Red flag number one.
Red flag
sure.
number one.
Yeah.
Infinite Jest for me dovetails into a very silly conversation I've had and wrote about male performative reading. Have you read? Yeah. They recently did a poll of single people and dating. And one of the number one green flags for men is that for women dating men is that they're readers.
Yeah.
Do you agree? You see that?
I haven't thought about dating men.
Yeah. But I wanted to, this is a little embarrassed, but so I solicited from a lot of women, like women who had gone home with a guy because they were reading a certain book, started dating them, and I have a really good crying in H Mart anecdote about how a guy got laid for.
Oh my
gosh!
Yeah.
So can I embarrass you by reading that to you? Okay, this woman said, I walked into a restaurant and saw a guy reading Crying in H Mart and beeline to the seat next to him.
Oh
to
my
eat
God!
Dinner. I definitely went home with him that
night.
My
God!
She tells me, also highlighting that she and her friends refer to him as Crying in H Mart Man. As for his actual interest in the book, Jordan remained skeptical. He was semi-literary, but being at the bar with it definitely felt like he was trying to get someone to talk to him about it. So I think the men need to put down Infinite Jest and pick up Crying in H Mart. Wow. It's going to get them laid.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely an annoying book to walk around with. Even when I went and bought it at the store, I was admittedly a little bit embarrassed. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a great novel, truly. And
no, I think we should reclaim it, and I think it's important to do so. I went to the Claremont colleges, where I went to Pitzer, but DFW was a professor at Pomona.
Yeah.
And he died before I got there, but his legacy really loomed large and everything. So
I just read this book by Bret Easton Ellis where he talks very honestly about him, and it's very interesting. I think it's called White.
Okay. I haven't read that one of Bret's, but
which, gosh, do I want to talk about? It's quite funny because I mean, there's parts of it that are really, really exceptional, and I think I miss that kind of honesty. I mean, he's very, like, clearly a very intelligent man and an exceptional writer from the beginning, from a very young age. And I think that there was this sort of rivalry between, they were called What were they called? The Brat Pack of the it was like the literary Brat Pack.
The literary Brat Pack, I think is what it was.
And so I think that the two of them had like kind of an unspoken rivalry, and so it was kind of interesting all these years later to read a book where he kind of addresses that. Yeah, and particularly the movie they made about his life and all of the great things that he actually really admired about David Foster Wallace being kind of erased through this lens of like everyone has to be this incredibly moral, unflawed being in the public eye, which I like agree with in some respects. But then there are some things where you're like, okay, that makes sense. And then you're slowly going down the hole of things that it's like, and another thing, like if you can't get over microaggressions, then, you know, you need to grow up. And I'm like, okay, like I can kind of see what he's saying. And then he's like, oh yeah. And if like, you can't understand that like you can't get over the fact that a valet guy like gropes you, like move on. And you're like, whoa.
Like, this is Brett, you're saying. Yes. Yeah, that's very.
Yeah. And you're like kind of like going with him because he's speaking in such a, like this brilliant, a well-written, powerful way, and then you as you go down the trail with him, you're like, okay, wait, I think that there's like,
I mean, he's
like, and voting for Trump is not that bad, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna head back.
I am a huge fan, but he's also a troll. Like, you know, and I think he knows that. And I think I'm really attracted
to that, and I think that's part of what enchants me about that canon, right? It's like the daringness to go there. Like, I get that. And it's enticing to me in some ways. Maybe because it feels so taboo now. But yeah.
Will we see more of that from you? Like,
I don't think so. I think maybe like when I'm in my 60s or something, I'll write my like indie tell-all. But for now, I have to maintain my career.
Rock Springs, Richard Ford. Last one on our list today, but a really, I mean, just so beautiful and heartbreaking. And like, you know, I just feel like when I was reading it and thinking about it, it was just like, they kind of feel like the platonic ideals of short stories. And 100%. That like, they just capture a moment that captures an emotion and distill it so well. Yeah, tell me about why you chose this book, and you seem to be a road trip person, so.
Oh, I mean, I just live on the road. Yeah. But yeah, I love this book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It would be a mistake to not include it. I just love Richard Ford's writing. I just think it's so powerful, and it has that kind of sparse Hemingway type quality where he just says exactly what needs to be said, and in this really potent way. And I just try to write like Richard Ford, honestly.
Do you have a favorite in this collection?
Gosh, it's been a while. I mean, I remember the first story really well, where he's like with, you know, there's just, I think that the way that he captures lightning in a bottle, sort of, is just so great. You know, I think that this is exactly the kind of story that I want to tell, about people interacting with each other. And what is my favorite? It's been a long time. I'm also due in for another one. Sweethearts is really great. Sweethearts, I believe, is about a couple and the woman's ex-husband is going to jail. And I think her new partner is her new boyfriend or new husband is taking him there with her, and he's kind of thinking about, he's looking at this couple and this life that he could have had, and he goes he's ruining his mistakes, which I think is a lot of what my new album is about. It's these are for me like these stories about people at just like a moment or a crossroads in their life, and it's a very mundane scenario, you know. But somehow within this like very mundane scenario of just like two people at a diner or you know, a couple talking or about something in particular, unlocks like this really great window into to humanity, I guess. And for me, that's what I really wanted to do with this new record. I wanted to make an album that was kind of a window into all these different people's lives, kind of ruining the consequences of the decisions they made. And it's not a huge like action-packed story, you know, but you feel so moved by it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the one that sticks out.
I know your next book will be about your time in Korea, but I'm curious, do you have any aspirations to write fiction?
Yeah, you know, I've been asked about this a couple times before, and I think it's interesting that, you know, I when I was in college, I was obsessed with Professor Torde, and he's a great novelist, and everyone should read his books. But I took every single class that he offered, every single class in the creative writing department, except for nonfiction, because I had no desire to write nonfiction. I wanted to be a fiction writer and write these kind of like gritty, manly stories. And I just felt that I could never write nonfiction because it would take too long to explain, you know, how my parents met and my ethnic identity, and everyone would have all these questions. And I think a big part of that is I never saw myself as a literary protagonist, because like I never read a book where there was someone like me that was a lead character. I wanted to be like one of these guys in Rock Springs or whatever.
I wanted to be the Matador.
I wanted to be Hans Castorp. I wanted to be the Matador. And yeah, then when my mom died, and this story about what had happened in the 6 months that she got her diagnosis and her passing, I think I just out of necessity needed to write that story, and didn't think about, well, oh no, I don't want to write nonfiction. I don't want to, you know, I don't feel comfortable with that. I was just like, I need to write this down to make sense of it, and also to share it with the people who can't even fathom that experience, to have a better understanding of what I went through, and how to, you know, understand me. And so it's funny because now I feel like I've had so much success with nonfiction that there's this pressure that people maybe aren't really going to be interested in me as a fiction writer. So yeah, my next book is another nonfiction book, which is a book I really wanted to write. You know, it felt like a very natural, it's not by any means a sequel, but it is a natural follow-up where, you know, after learning how to cook Korean dishes and sort of reconnecting with my Korean heritage in the wake of my mother's death, I found myself wanting to go further and wanting to learn the language. And my mom always used to say to me, if you just spent a year there, I think you would leave fluent. And so I really wanted to live abroad for the year. The timing worked out really well to do that. And so I think a lot of people will be fascinated to read about, if you just dedicate a year of your life to one thing, what does that look like, and how far can you take it? And, you know, what is it like living abroad for a year and kind of taking a pause on your life? And I think there are going to be a bunch of funny anecdotes about, you know, struggling with the language and the kind of mishaps that come with that. But yeah, someday I think I would love to. That's a very long-winded way of saying. Someday I would like to write fiction, but at this moment, I'm a little bit nervous about it not being something of interest. You know.
Well, it is very much of interest to me. I'm curious, as isolation is a through line of many of these, and actually I find more that I do these conversations is a through line of many books. Isolation, is that something that you grapple with in the new book?
You know what? I thought I was going to feel so isolated and so lonely the year that I was there, and I actually felt so at home in this way that I never, that sounds really cheesy, but I honestly made like lifelong friends that I felt connected to in ways that I didn't even know that I was missing in my life, and I felt very connected to I mean, I don't have a family in the U.S., really. I'm not really close to any family in the U.S., so you know, to be with my aunt and like to feel that kind of affection, which I honestly haven't experienced in over 10 years, is I didn't even realize like how much I miss that in my life. And so I actually felt so, what is the opposite of isolation? I felt so, I don't know,
ensconced in love,
like a great sense of belonging. And you know, the other thing is too is like when I live in the U.S., I'm not really home at all. You know, I'm living on the road and working constantly, and so it was the first year since COVID, which doesn't even really count, that in like almost 10 years that I got to witness all of the seasons in one place.
Wow.
And so that sensation was so felt so new to me. So I actually felt so much a part of a place more than I have in many years. And it was actually not, I mean, there were parts of it that, were difficult for sure. And I think that's part of it. But especially in the beginning when you're getting your footing, I mean, it's also still very difficult for me to like figure out how to go to the bank and get anything done or like get a cell phone. But those things are hard here too.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.